I got one of those nasty headaches, so I'm going home. According to the physicians, they are caused by the metal plate in my head. I do not believe their findings are sound. The problem began around 5 months ago, about the same time that my 3-year-old wife started working as a receptionist at the local law firm. The plate has been there for 10 years. I'll give you some background now. I'll go first. My name is Bobby Turner. In the 1960s, I spent 4 years as a Marine. You guessed it. Some moron shot a mortar at me. I will call them whatever I want. Remember, I have a plate placed into my head. I spent several months in several hospitals before being freed and returning to the farm. This should be short and sweet. I got disability, compensation. Not quite enough to get by. I returned to my studies. I currently work for the county as a heavy equipment operator. I have a backhoe and grader in the barn behind my house. On days like this, I generally use the grader to level the county's sand roads. However, this was a weekday. That is what we called examining all of the new county, state, and federal regulations while sitting in a classroom. After nearly 2 hours of listening, I realized I wanted to lie down. When I notified my supervisor that I needed to leave, he did not object, despite knowing about my medical condition. As I previously stated, I do not believe the plate in my skull is the cause of my headaches. There is something wrong with the force. My wife decided that she wanted to work 6 months ago. I balked. Following my father's death, I inherited our land and house. We had more than enough money between my job and disability, but she insisted, and I gave in. She was recruited as a receptionist for a law office. I warned her about the firm founder's son. I knew him from school. He was tall, beautiful, and affluent. He was a genuine ladies' man, however. He often talked about his victories and dated many of the prettiest females at school. He was strolling around in the locker room naked, bragging about his massive J-son and how no woman could resist it. We both played sports. According to the song, rich pupils go to college, while impoverished children go to combat. That is exactly what happened. He was a lawyer, and I came home with a plate in my head. My spouse and I had another dispute last night. My objective is to start a family. She would like to wait. For how long? She isn't sure, but she never looks up when we're talking. I believe I have figured out what the problem is. Let us now discuss my wife, Sue. It was 4 years ago when we met. After graduating from high school, she began working as a factory receptionist. She wasn't a virgin, and she had lovers. Not a problem. I wasn't either. We had been dating for over a year when I proposed to her. She told me that she had always wanted to live on a farm, despite the fact that she grew up in a city 2 counties away, owning a horse, keeping a garden, and living in the countryside. She wanted 4 children. She seems like the perfect woman for me. Our first few years of marriage were lovely. We rode a lot together when I purchased us 2 horses. We even started going on overnight trips and putting up tents in the woods. She then expressed a wish to report to work. I had suspicions, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Let me inform you that I weigh 190 pounds and am 6 feet tall. I'm considered beautiful, and I work hard to stay in shape. Sue is 5 feet 8 inches tall and has wonderful 34 billion breasts that are pretty sensitive. She also has blonde hair and blue eyes. She weighs around 115 pounds. Each of us owns a nice vehicle. I actually own a Ford pickup truck. As I previously stated, I can feel the disturbance rising as I get closer to our farm. As I round the turn, I see why. My home is facing the attorney's blue Corvette. I coasted to a stop and turned off the engine. I keep a 1911 Colt .45 in my glove compartment. I remove it and give it some room. Today is the final day of this. I access the den with ease by using the side door. I can hear them in our bedroom. As I turn to leave the room, I see a note addressed to me on the coffee table. I pick it up and read silently. Bobby, please understand that you were once the focus of my sincere adoration. I apologize for all that has occurred, but that is how it is. About 8 months ago, I was shopping at a Memphis mall and came on Paul. We had a few drinks, then he took me to lunch. I was intrigued by all the rumors about his Johnson. Our destination was the Ramada Inn. I became fascinated. He hired me when a position came up at his office. Several days a week, we would have private discussions at his house or at work. We spent the late evenings and Sunday afternoons shopping with him. We experienced love. He invited me to accompany him to Miami to deal with a customer. When we return, I'll move my possessions into his home and file for divorce. You will have time to relax because we will be gone for about a week. I'm aware of your occasionally erratic temperament. Bobby, I genuinely loved you, and I'm sincerely sorry for hurting you in this way. Please make an attempt to understand. Sue. She's going to find out how obstinate I can be and how much I'll never understand it. I creep down the hallway and loiter near the bedroom door. Paul is treating her as if he owns her. I tap the door with the .45's barrel. They look up at the same time. Paul lunges to his feet, sending his flying everywhere. Bobby, you really scared me. We'll get ready and go when you put down that pistol. He gives a smirk. Paul immediately stopped speaking and remained still as I chatted with my wife. You're not going to shoot anyone, you understand. I fired the first round into the wall, above his head. Sue let out a shriek. Just let us go, Bobby. I have no passion for anything, and I will divorce you. Please let us depart. In the den, I read your letter. Is his huge Johnson at the center of this? Almost all she said. When I turned to face Paul, he is smiling. That really went to my nerves. He had his Johnson, dangling between his legs. I snapped a shot from about an inch above it. That's when the hubbub began. Paul was pulling on his Johnson and screamed. It has shrunk by around 2 inches during the previous 5 minutes. When his hand seized, he must have cried louder and sank on his knees next to the bed, making the pain worse. He was bleeding badly. Then he started to spew up. He'd had a full breakfast. He shifted to his side and murmured something about my forebears. Sue sat on the bed, knees lowered to her chest. You read the letter, she asked, peering directly at me. Yes, I responded. I created the sentence about his massive Johnson because he made me. But is that really all there was to it? Yes, that was all he wanted you to know. He likes taking delight in it. Bobby, I need an ambulance, please. He sobbed. No, you don't. You need a grave, I said as soon as he turned to face me. My subsequent shot hit him in the left eye. His surviving brains lay on the ground behind him. Sue became silent for a moment. Bobby, please. I never gave you sloppy or even seconds. On the days we did, I'd return home with a headache or something. Anything I could think of to prevent you from discovering about us. What is the woman who is cheating thinking? Perhaps if I forgive her, we will live happily ever after. I returned her grin, saying thank you. My next strike landed on her forehead. I hauled them out to the Corvette after covering their bodies in bed blankets. I assembled them exactly as I found them while naked in the passenger seat. I drove his keys out behind the barn after finding them in his pants pocket, which was hidden from view in case a car went by. I cleaned the area and opened the windows. To get rid of the vomit odor, I had to open a can of air freshener. I piled all of the garments and paper towels into a rubbish bag and dumped it into the van. I then went to the barn and turned on the backhoe. Everything was covered up and buried in about 2 hours. I reasoned that there was no use in talking to them. The monster refused to listen to them. I came home and called the sheriff's department. I contacted Sheriff Parker and told him I'd found a letter saying my wife was having extramarital relations with Paul, the attorney. I asked him for advice. Look, Bobby, call a divorce lawyer and begin the procedure. Serve them as soon as they return. It is preferable to avoid such circumstances as soon as feasible. I hung up and called the next county's council. I booked a meeting for the next day. She copied the letter after I took it with me. Sue wrote it, therefore it was put on exhibit. When they returned, she would have the documentation ready. I wrapped everything Sue had in plastic garbage bags and put it in the garage next to her car. I was back grading county roads the next day. The force resumed its original state. You guessed it, however. They took a week to return. The law firm phoned me after 10 days to see whether I had heard from my wife. The sheriff's office subsequently dispatched an investigator to obtain a statement around 2 weeks later. I referred him to my attorney. I showed him all of Sue's trash, which was waiting for her near her car. He never responded to me. The feds showed up after I got off work one night, maybe a month later. They posed thought-provoking questions. Is Jose Gonzalez somebody you know? Not should I responded. Manuel Gonzalez, perhaps. Not him, either. What's the deal here? Jose Diel's father was the customer Paul was going to see in Miami. Last year, Paul represented him in a drug trafficking case, but during the trial he made an error. He asked an unexpected question, which caused Manuel, one of his customers, to get into serious difficulties. After being found guilty, he was sentenced to 50 years in federal prison. Jose requested that Paul submit an appeal on behalf of his child. That should have raised suspicions. However, because Paul was unwell and unable to travel, Jose sent $100,000 to Paul's corporate account and pushed him to visit Miami to resolve the situation. Like a fool, Paul chooses to abduct your wife, with whom he has been having an affair for about a year, in the hope of receiving additional money for a large appeal. Paul used his credit card to pay for the gas in his Corvette while he was in town. We suspect that following that, he came to this region, picked up your wife, and they fled for Miami. We can't find another gas receipt, so the Colombians must have arrived before stopping for petrol or lunch. That is our assumption, however. What is Jose's perspective on the subject? Nothing. He went to the hospital about a week after they went missing, and he died 6 days later. We never got a chance to question him about it. That suggests that I can part with anything she possesses. I have garbage bags in my garage. Please feel free to read it. That will not be necessary. A copy of the letter she left would be helpful for our records. I said, no problem. They went after I handed them a copy of the letter. That was about 30 years ago, and since I buried Sue and Paul beneath what is now my hog pen, I haven't felt any interruption in the energy. That concludes the tale for today. Please leave a comment and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Your support allows the algorithm to promote my work more broadly. If you are new to the channel, remember to click the subscribe button. It actually permits me to keep bringing you fresh stories. I appreciate you viewing, and I hope to see you in future videos.